Preparing.
Okay, so everyone, welcome. This is the Oracle Temple Monthly Spirituality Salon, and we call it a salon because after brief presentations on a spiritual theme, we go into salon circle format, and we're going to invite everybody who's online with us to participate, share your thoughts on the topic tonight, and learn a little bit more about yourself, everyone on the call, and hopefully our creator. We start with an opening mantra, and if you have the program in front of you, you can say it with me. It goes like this: Source of all being, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from the fear of death to the knowledge of immortality. Allow us to reunite with you and come to know your mysteries. So tonight, our theme is full spectrum spirituality, and I pulled together a little PowerPoint presentation. So we're going to start with that. I'm going to share screen. Okay, so first, just about our church. It is a multi-faith church. Everyone is welcome. Our programs, by the way, are usually fine for children as well. The church is part of our Valley of Light community. It's an intentional community. And we say it's a community for cultural creatives. And what we mean by that is people who are thinking about the future and want to be social architects and be creative. So tonight's theme is full spectrum spirituality. And I just wanted to start with this quote from Chief Seattle. Humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but a thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together. All things connect. This iconic wheel, which Barbara Marx Hubbard originally designed in a slightly different format, is called the Wheel of CoCreation. Here we call it the sectors of society. And there's a picture of Barbara Marx Hubbard above the wheel. She was here attending a Building the New World conference at Radford University, and we had the great joy of hosting her as a guest before and after the conference. And I have been inspired by this iconic symbol from the first time I saw it, which was actually way before I even knew about Barbara Marx Hubbard, before I knew she had designed it, because the first time I saw it, it just made, visceral, primordial sense to me. So what it's representing basically are all the pieces that you would find in a civilized town or community. And just going through them quickly, we've put them in this order here. Barbara had them in a different order, but we've got learning and education, communications and media, art and culture, economics and business, peace building and relations, justice and governance, health and wellness, food, water and environment, infrastructure and resources, science and technology, and then we put spirituality at 12 o'clock because we feel that that sector is sort of the glue that holds the other ones together. But this is the spider web in this iconic symbol, which represents that we can't work in silos anymore, that people who operate in learning and education also have to take into account the health and welfare of students and so forth. The world is just too interconnected now for us to think of these as isolated areas of either interest or work, how we go out into the world and present ourselves. I am currently reading a book. It was written by Rob Hopkins. Some of you might know him. He wrote a bestseller called The Transition Town Handbook. And it was all the rage about a decade ago. And a lot of towns patterned themselves off of that book. This new book he is addressing sort of the crisis of culture that has gripped us globally pretty much. And what he's saying is that our power of imagination is what's going to get us out of all of the troubles we've created for ourselves. And his concern is that we are now lacking in imagination, which we're going to go into. But he too sort of addresses all of these sectors. So one of the first themes he hits is that the education of our children and their freedom to play in particular will determine our future. So our kids are our future. He stresses that our communication must focus on the positive, or else apathy and a sense of powerlessness sets in. And there's tons of studies that he reports about in the book which back that up. What we think is what we do, it's what we believe, and it's how we operate in the world. He also stresses that our ability to create art basically equates to our power to dream and then manifest. We can't create without having that artist mindset, whether we think of it that way or we think of it as an imagination tool. Art is really critical. He hits the reality that fair economics produce fair outcomes. He cites a lot of statistics proving what probably everyone here on this call knows, that capitalism, unregulated at least, is causing despair and misery all over the world. The fifth sector is about relations and peace building. And here at the Oracle Institute in particular, we're building the peace pentagon. So this is a sector we care much about. And it simply stands for the thought that our relations must be respectful, peaceful, and that we need to appreciate and support cultural differences. Social justice is the key to human thriving, and he hits that hard in this book. It's also the key to developing strong and supportive communities. And our health depends on holism. This is now a term that's being used across many disciplines, and it means basically natural holarchies that exist in nature, as opposed to hierarchies, which tend to be man-made and subjugating in nature. But natural holism is how the world works. It's how it operates. And it's represented in this regenerative web of life. Then environment, of course, is paramount. The term place is the new catchphrase. So your place needs to be clean, serene, and green, because you will, whether you realize it or not, be rooted to your environment, and your health will depend on it. Resources is another sector. And we've come to recognize that resources must be shared if we wish to live in a value-based world. And we need to start honoring the commons, whether it's our local parks, our rivers, the oceans, which then get into the global commons. And then he stresses that ethical science is mandatory. We've got crazed geniuses in white lab coats all around the world, building and designing and crafting just because they can, without any regard to whether they should. Another point is that science is not going to save us this time. Science has saved us in the past, but it's probably not going to save us this time. Only we can do that. And then lastly, we believe that spirituality encompasses all of the above, because they're all based on a value set, a progressive liberal view of how we should be proceeding in a collective way. I pulled a couple quotes from his book that I wanted to read you, because I really like this book, and I really admire Rob Hopkins. Regarding our children, he actually quotes another author, Richard Louv, who is the author of a book called Last Child in the Woods. And he says that most kids are under well-meaning protective house arrest. And by the way, this is pre-COVID. This is pre-COVID text. Rarely out of their parents' sight and on tablets, whether of the digital or pharmaceutical variety. because Hopkins lives in England, some of these stats are from Great Britain. He says 1 in 10 kids is now medicated in England for a mental disorder. He also tells the story of psychiatrist Stuart Brown, who wanted to study convicted mass murderers, the mass shooters. And one of the men he interviewed was the imprisoned Charles Whitman, who had shot 46 people at the University of Texas. And what he found after interviewing these mass shooters, that they have 2 things in common. The first is probably something we all would already know, that they come from abusive families, either physically or seriously emotionally abusive families. But the second thing he discovered, which might be a surprise, is that these adult murderers reported never being able to play as children, either due to being put to work by parents or because of impoverished circumstances, that play was not a luxury they had. And he ends the chapter on kids by saying, today's mania for raising young Einsteins might have destroyed the real young Einstein, who did poorly in school and was a notorious daydreamer. He also reports research that shows that fewer toys mean more imagination. And taking toys away from children is actually a good thing, because then their creative juices will start flowing. He also talked about, this is where we get into connecting sectors, this beautiful program in England where they merged a daycare center with an assisted living center to just glorious results. And the multi-generational relations is what so many people are lacking now. Lastly, I just wanted to talk about another item he hits in the book called the shit life syndrome. He interviewed doctors who have coined this term for patients who report finding their meaning in life is close to impossible because their struggle to survive commands all their intellectual and emotional resources. He cites that anxiety disorders have increased 20-fold in England in the past 30 years. 1 in 3 kids reports feeling suicidal. 1 in 6 have self-harmed. And that 84% of adult Britons report feeling unable to cope with life. So this is where we are because we've failed to understand that all of these pieces are connected, and that health in one, or even prosperity in one sector, doesn't cross over into the others. So I just want to take a minute to talk about the peace pentagon in our sanctuary, because what we believe here is that humankind has gone through 4 paradigms, and that we're approaching this paradigm, the 5th, which hopefully will bring the Godhead back in balance. And by that we mean a more sophisticated view of the Godhead, and a view that includes, if you want to personify both masculine and feminine energies. This is where we're headed as a species, and it too relates to the wheel, because it is all about balance, and it's about understanding and comprehending the interconnection of life. But we feel also that this paradigm could be in jeopardy without falling into the despair that many humans are feeling. I too am concerned about whether we're going to make it. Another key feature of our belief system here is that community is the way forward. It's the natural environment for humans to be in community, to be in multi-generational families. And even if they're the families you choose, as opposed to those you were born to or with, it's a very important component of life, which people cite, the people who are unhappy cite all the time. So it's about place, it's about people, and it's about purpose. We also, for members of our community, we have 5 paths of service here. It's sort of a breakdown of that wheel I showed you. So we've got the path of the native, and those that path would be for people who are interested in, the farming animals, gardening, being outdoors in nature and landscaping. We've got the path of the scientists for those who can help us keep our technology together and also heal us if and when we get sick. We've got the path of the artisan, which includes a publishing house, art, music, and infrastructure. Path of the peacemaker, which Katie Kennedy leads. And that's for people who want to get out into the world and do social activism. And then lastly, the path of the oracle for people like me who are really interested in their spiritual path and practice. And our mission and motto are really quite simple. We do believe that a sustainable spiritual environment is conducive for happiness and for leading a productive life. So those are the principles that we stress here. And if you're interested in our community, please reach out, because we're wanting to grow it right now. And that's the end of that. So at this point, I would like to open up the salon, and if you have a passion for one of those sectors, or maybe you've lived the experience of realizing how closely aligned every one of them are, please share your story, share your thoughts, share what you think is sacred, because we'd love to hear from you. And you can either just unmute and jump in or raise your hand. Katie can see who's raising hands, right, Katie?
So the thing that resonated with me particularly was the failure of imagination. In other words, there is a world that we each know in our hearts is possible. And reality, the reality that the powers that be in business as usual have created are constantly telling us that it's a fantasy. And as you enter into the imagination of the world that you know is possible, you know that it's possible because it tugs at you. Things happen and you realize that that's how it should be, or things happen and you realize that's not how it should be, So the interesting thing about that resonated with me is that that's what we need to do. We need to share our stories of the world we know in our hearts is possible. If we share those stories, they come alive. So if we make the effort to take it beyond or past the intellectual stage, like where we talk about how important community is, to rather the ways in which, the things that I really like about community, seeing other people every day and smiling at each other and knowing what each other is reliable for. And, oh, I know who I should ask about that. All those concrete things that you can share. And then it becomes really curious. Why are we doing this? So that's where I'm at with what Laura presented.
Go ahead, Mimi. Wait, you're on mute.
Tying into what you just said and the previous slide that talked about children and creativity. My story as a relatively new retiree from education, 30 years in the field. You ask why, in spite of seeing the needs, we don't move forward in what we know would be correct. I don't have an answer for that. But what I saw, and this is Montgomery County, Maryland, supposedly the best and the brightest of what would be good for kids, supposedly. I had a class for the last 15 years of 2 to 4-year-olds who were severely delayed in language skills. Some of them were on the autistic scale. Anyway, I ran a program that became, in those days when it was possible to do what you knew was right, I ran a program that became very popular. My immediate supervisor would send people over to me all the time to observe the class. And it was built on play, totally built on play. And I mean, I had a system in my head for what was going to unfold, obviously, and I had their needs in my head, but everything was met, whether it was language skills, articulation, concept development, it was all built on play. And we had bean tables, rice tables, sand tables, water tables. And we had a class, I had an assistant of about 10 children a year. So that was ideal. It gradually came to me about 5 years before I decided to quit 1 year early because I couldn't take it anymore, that things were changing rapidly. And one of the first things they did was take away kindergarten from recess from the kindergarten students who were right next to me, because my class, the older ones, would feed into that class. So we did a lot of cross merging. And the first thing they did, as the new curriculum came down from high school, every year they change it, until suddenly it was like in my rear view mirror. They took kindergarten away from, recess from kindergarten. They turned that time into 90 minutes of unbreakable language arts, sitting and writing. And by unbreakable, the children, the specialists could not pull the kids by class for art, PE, or music. It was 90 minutes at your desk. And then the next year, they took recess away from the third graders because it is a heavy duty testing year. And finally, there were two things that happened. The year before the pre-K was supposed to get their curriculum, I was outside looking at the borders in the hallway, and I was looking at kindergarten, and I was like amazed. This was like about January, and the kids, they had posted examples of full sentences with punctuation. And I'm just standing there with my mouth open. It was the new stuff she had posted. And I went, man, that's amazing. And I noticed there was a parent beside me. And it's after school. And I sort of turned to her and she was crying. And she said, yeah, it's amazing, but my kid can't do it. And he comes home every day crying. And I comforted her, but I did a lot of thinking, obviously. And it is ridiculous. Her child was normal, absolutely, totally normal, and going through hell. And then the next year, the kindergarten curriculum, the pre-K curriculum came down on my head, and all these boxes arrived, and God. Anyway, the scripted curriculum was what I headed for. And it literally, for every 15 minutes of the day, described and scripted what I was supposed to do. So that, I'm making this up, but it was literally this scripted. For the first 2 weeks in November, for 15 minutes each day, you will teach he and she. And I looked at it and I couldn't do it anymore. I just couldn't do it. And so I put in for retirement that year. Why is it this way? You know, how many times I've talked to my immediate supervisors, and, you know, he kept wanting to move me into admin. It's like, no. But anyway, why is it like this? Because it comes down through them. It comes from the Department of Education, who have people on their boards who don't know what they're doing, or if they do, they don't care. And they're looking for other goals within the area of education. But when you talk about losing our most creative kids, we're torturing them, absolutely torturing them. Anyway, that's my story. And I don't have an answer.
John, go ahead.
Has anyone heard of psychohistory? There's a whole discipline that has developed on the consequences. It's all about the consequences of the way children are raised on what happens when they're adults. And the difficulty that we have, and it's a very, very profound difficulty, is that we're unable to imagine the evil that's behind what Mimi was describing. It's just beyond imagination, it's beyond belief, but it's very intentional. So the situation that we're in right now with the pandemic is crazy making. There's so many things that are going on that don't make sense, that you have a choice. I mean, the idea that herd immunity has gone away and we're not headed for herd immunity, I mean, that's crazy making. So just as an example, so what we have to do is either retreat, right, so that we can't really engage, or we have to create, and this is the imagination of a better world, we have to create together with other people who are experiencing the same crazy making nature of what's going on right now. We have to create what we want, right? We have to ask each other, well, how should it be? And when Mimi says, I know how it should be for the children, what they're doing now is torturing them, then we could, or whoever is sitting together with Mimi, you could imagine what would be the ideal education. And there are two things that you come up with. Every child should be in a larger context than just with their age, so that they have other resources and other ideas so that they're able to mentor and be mentored, right? That's one thing. That's the whole Montessori idea, that you're encouraging them to. And everything needs to be beautiful, rhythmical, encompassed, and then you get the Waldorf school classroom. And everything that we need in order to remedy this situation exists. It's right there, it's available. And the only thing that we're not doing is sitting together and asking each other, hey, tell me something about the world you know in your heart as possible. And now you know what I'm working on all the time.
Well, that is what he did with the Transition Town Handbook. And this is sort of a follow-up where he's describing going in to towns and actually consulting. And he tells one story where there was a baker who was having trouble making it. And there were these young kids who wanted to open up a brewery. And so I can't remember what they called it. It was something clever. The yeast was in the name. And they started this combined bakery and bar. And he reports that 5 years later, it's just kicking ass. It's doing great. But he was bringing in these stakeholders in the town, people who were small business owners. And yeah, it's amazing what we can co-create, to borrow a term from Barbara, if we allow ourselves to let our imaginations flow. And he talks about how when he works with adults, it's all about play too. They do things like improv, stream of consciousness storytelling, where the next person takes the next, section of the story. He's got a few exercises in this book. And so, yeah, he's pointing out that the collective has wisdom in it and also can help motivate the group. And it's infectious. If one person is positive and imaginative and can help break the ice, you know, most people will come along and help brainstorm a solution. And that's what we're lacking, because COVID's not helping, back to COVID. But yeah, if we're in a community, and it doesn't need to be like a physical intentional community either, but if we have a community of like-minded souls, it's that level of co-creative brainstorming that's gonna build a better world.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, hello from Florida. I think it was touched on in both what Mimi and John shared, but it seems to me that what's really lacking is that we're lacking that internal perspective on things. Like she shared about the story of the mother seeing the sentences, and yeah, externally it looks like there's some advancement, but the internal experience of the child was they were suffering. And also with what John was sharing, how if we get together and we share our own individual personal views of the world, then we'll have a better understanding. And this is something that Ken Wilber hits pretty hard on in his books, that most of the world is dealing with flatland, is dealing with the external experience of things. And you only get half of the story with that. But the real experience, and we all have this in life, is our internal experience, our desires and our feelings and our emotions, things that cannot be measured. And that because we live in a society that's so material and so external, that is oftentimes when you talk about the internal, oh, you're daydreaming, you know, that's something that doesn't really matter. What really matters is the brick and mortar and how much money you got in your bank account. But we won't be able to take that with us when we die. And yeah, I think that we're going through growing pains as a race and as a culture, that it's natural to some extent that there's an ebb and flow of growth, that we're the universe evolving to a point where it's just starting to understand itself and being able to look back through the web of life. And there will necessarily be some hard lessons to learn through that. And I'm grateful for a gathering like this, where we're sharing ideas and we're thinking about those deep internal questions. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing, everyone. Melissa wanted to share something also.
Yeah, hello, I'm Melissa. Yeah, I was just listening to something based on the just alternative ways to school. We have a 3-year-old, so it's definitely something that we are actively doing and intend on doing with his future. One of the things that the man was saying was that their school system, and I'm sure Mimi has seen this over time too, which her name's Patricia on here, but yeah, that Mimi has seen, is that it's gone from the stage of a little bit of more freedom to almost this fitting into a box of how to be like a worker in the world, and how to live in this industrial, when it was this industrial kind of setting of just things going on a conveyor belt and being put into this certain thing. And when there's a defect in one of these objects that are being created, then it gets pulled off the conveyor belt and put aside while everyone else keeps going. And if you look at that as a child, if they're not meeting that criteria, I used to work at a school teaching physical education, that the people didn't pass this reading and writing test, that like the FCAT, I don't know what it's called something else in Florida now, but this, you know, standardized test, then they were placed into this school to really help them with this, when a lot of them were, you know, maybe just a little bit more creative, or just couldn't sit down at a desk because sitting down at a desk just didn't work for them. So yeah, we are kind of envisioning our child's education and future in a way that is promoting this sense of he's not really going to be on this conveyor belt in a way, and he's going to be able to go his own way and be valued for his own unique gifts. And I think that, yeah, just it's that aspect of it, bringing it back to the children, and that children are our future. We're hoping that we can, you know, create that life for him where he has the freedom to, you know, open a small business if he wanted in his teenage years or before that, or whatever that is for him. So yeah, I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, I heard something kind of interesting in that vein, that out of just like the reality of how life works, children are raised and taught by a generation that's already out of date. So we're teaching them, training them in a way to live in a world that was 10, 15 years ago, when they're going to live in a world that we have no idea what the world's going to be like when they're there, and we won't get to see it. So best to let them make the world for themselves, and the world that they want to live, they want to see. And that can only happen with allowing the freedom of imagination, allowing a child to dream big. Not that our elders don't have a lot to teach us and a lot to offer.
So just to take that a little bit further, one of the things that I've been working on is the Declaration of Independence, because it's the prescription for how to proceed. You know, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary to dissolve the political bands that have connected us to the powers that be in business as usual, it's necessary to declare the causes which impel us to the separation. So if you take and you know, to assume the power that we actually have by nature, by nature's God, nature's law. So imagine that we conceive of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness differently. Imagine for a minute that when we say we need to secure life, we mean that everybody has to have enough money so that they can live, right? Nobody has to earn their living. Everybody has a dividend income from the economy so that they're in a position to live. Because then they are at liberty, right, to pursue happiness. And then everybody who's on this call knows that the only thing that makes you truly happy is succeeding in accomplishing your life's purpose. This is why we're always talking about our life purpose. What do we feel called to do, right? It's the reason that we want community. So if we were to imagine that, and this is, you know, very simple thing to do, it's just a matter of imagining. Imagine that you never had to think for a minute about where your next meal was coming from, whether you had a car with, you know, that you could go where you wanted, etc. That there was an equitable distribution of the wealth that we all create together, so that you really were at liberty to pursue your life's purpose. Then everything that happens, there's no more compulsion. You don't have to do something that somebody has money wants you to do that you don't really want to do. You don't have to be part of some institution that controls your, you know, your life. Then everything that happens would be voluntarily as inspired. And the most interesting thing is to watch all the objections that come up when somebody says, nobody has to work for a living, nobody can be compelled because they need money. And it's not true. Everybody would love to be in that position. And guess what? Then only the things that we want would ever happen. And the whole world would change. It would just be entirely different. So I say, let's reclaim the promise of the Declaration of Independence and get busy dissolving the political bands, declaring the causes, and assuming the power. And that government is a just government that governs on the basis of the consent. And let's make sure we're clear that it's the active consent. That government is just, that governs on the basis of the active consent of we the people. So that's, that's the thing that I'm working on, and we're having a hell of a time. We're just smiles from ear to ear all the time. It's just exciting.
We have in our Constitution a preamble that discusses a declaration of interdependence. And I know we've got the Tom drafted declaration of cosmic, what is it? What's the title, Tom?
Declaration of Cosmic Cooperation.
Right. So the ideals, and this is another one of those key ideas. There are three things that everybody wants. Everybody wants to be free to do whatever they feel like doing. And everybody wants the social conditions in which they're living to be just. And everybody wants to collaborate with each other, cooperate, in order to create the community that supports everybody. So if we were to say that when the scientists are totally free to pursue truth, and when the artists are totally free to pursue beauty, and the educators and the preachers or the pastors or the whatever they are totally free to help us do the good, right? So thinking, feeling, willing, right? And that is the realm of our freedom. And that everything that has to do with our social relations comes out of our common sense of justice. What would be the just thing to do, right? And go back to common law. And then, hey, everybody wants to collaborate with each other, cooperate voluntarily as inspired in order to provide everything that everybody needs or wants or
All
desires.
right, so John, I've just got to interpose here. White nationalists do not want to collaborate with immigrants. Okay, so you're
No,
saying some
nobody in the
very,
existing-
very lofty, value-based, pluralistic sentiments, which I happen to share with you. But let's not leave reality entirely as we have this salon. The reality is we're living in a very polarized environment, not just in the United States, but globally.
No,
And there are
there's
many
no-
people who don't share our value set.
There's no polarized. This is part of what the popular culture does to us. Remember that voting creates winners and losers. So the divide is between freedom and love. So if you're primarily motivated by your love of humanity, then you're going to want to be making sure that society, the government, does all the things that actually.
Am I going to have to get a
doesn't-
spiral dynamics chart on you? Come on. Let's not be naive. There are people on this planet who have very different worldviews. Some of them are exceedingly ethnocentric.
Yeah, right.
Okay,
Exactly.
and some of them are world-centric. And
So
to
So
bring
it's-
the conversation back to full spectrum spirituality,
that's what I was
there are
doing.
many things that we who do share a value set can do to help lead the way. But the reality is that those who have power aren't going to want to give it up easily. Those who have a different value set are not going to give up their value set. But what history shows, or what it's shown until now anyway, is that over time, the evolutionary impulse does help pull people up the consciousness spiral. And happily, the fastest growing meme right now is the green meme. There's the cultural creatives in the sense that they're world centric. They do believe that that kid in Africa who's starving is a part of me. They feel it at a gut level as well as intellectually. And that is our hope, is that if we can model communities that maintain and can, there's a book called Does Altruism Exist? By David Sloan Wilson, and he's both a mathematician and a sociologist. And I love this book because he talks about, and actually from a mathematical standpoint, the odds of an altruistic project flourishing and the odds of it being just destroyed. And I'll use an example that I think of when I thought of a lot when I read that book, Damanhur. You could take Damanhur and you could plop Damanhur in the middle of Detroit, and there'd be enough people with eyes to see and ears to hear, and that very elevated second tier mindset of Damanhur would probably catch on. But you take Damanhur and you plop it in the middle of Somalia and they're dead. Okay, I mean, they're not only not going to spread altruism, they're all going to get massacred. So the point I'm trying to make is that I just needed to interject a little reality into the conversation.
But may I respond to that, or shall
Yes,
I?
but then we're going to let some other people speak. But yes, John, go ahead.
The interesting thing is that most of the people that I'm working with that were concerned about this are the people that you're denigrating. And
I'm not
the
denigrating anybody.
well,
I didn't denigrate
they've
anyone.
got
I was
this lower
describing the
consciousness and
reality
they're
on the
white
ground.
supremacists and all that stuff. I mean, it's just not true. The thing is that you ask anybody, you get into conversation with any of these people who you think are like that, and it turns out they're just like us. So there is a mean in the way in which the powers that be administer everything that allows us to accept the dichotomy. It doesn't exist. Sit down.
Right, so John, we're going to move on. We're going to agree to disagree, but my eyes don't lie to me. White supremacists stormed the Capitol on January 6th.
That's not true. I was there. There were no white Capitol. That
Would
was
someone else like to share?
It's just not true.
Okay.
I'll jump in here. What the hell?
Go for it, Eric.
All right. All right, I'm going to go backwards here. First off, Laura, history shows, but we have no history and we have no her story from the last time we were at this point in time, which is the beginning of the Aquarian Age. This is the ruling dynamic of the nous. And the unified field in the universe is constructed in such a way that we go through different periods of different vibrations. It ain't a matter of astrology. It's just a matter of cyclic reality. So here we are. We have some carryover, but it's interesting because the last time we were here was, according to your 5 paradigms, right? The beginning of the great goddess paradigm, the second one, 25,000 years ago. So that's fascinating. But it's really instructive. So historically we're at a shifting point because we're on the way out of this Piscean, watery, psychic torture realm into a whole nother world. And that's where we got the cross currents of the ocean and the bay coming in and making turbulent water right now. But one thing's for damn sure, when it's all said and done, that water is going to lift and change all of that into an airy way. So that's one thing. And then the other thing to start with, the whole thing with imagination, man, there's so much to say about that. the second tarot card is the Mage,
Right?
and I Mage. It's funny, I age, but I Mage. And it's so essential for us in that interface with the realm of reality that we are, that is the energetic field, plays. It constructs, it self-feedbacks, it cycles, it's fractal, it's holographic, it's everything, and it's in our cells. And our cells are reading that and playing with it and interacting with it. And it's essential that our cellular mechanisms to do that also has vitality. Structured shaped water exists around all our DNA in it. And that is what creates the resonance patterns with the field and cycles up. So just imagine for a minute, what is in all the work that anyone's ever done, what do you remember? And I'll bet you, if you think about it, it's the times when your work was play, whether you were earning money at it or not, when your work was play. And when your play becomes work, right? Then it starts getting not so fun again. But if you can integrate those two, because your navigational axis is rooted in the earth, in the mother, and connected and open up to the heavenly gateway so that our light bodies can fully play in that realm. And so what are we doing but torturing the kids by taking away all of that imaginational playtime? Yeah, that's so huge. It's so huge. It's so important. And it's not just a mental construct of what you can do, but it's your whole body is being like shut down, you know, to be put in a little box that I got to do this. I mean, I remember good times in school, right? It was when it was fun and playful and whatnot, but when it was super structured and you got a really strict teacher, man, I remember that too, and it sucked. And I also remember doing all the little details of word constructions and sentence construction, and you know, I was looking out the window because I couldn't wait to get home and go back and play in the woods, which I did almost every day. And that was the navigational chart for me to be able to know where I was. So I don't know how these kids are going to like turn out. Well, I do. I think we're all seeing it because being in that realm is going to affect your whole response system and nervous system. And now you get drugged and now you are like, you know, on speed and you're disconnected even more. And as a kid growing up, having that going, oh man, it's terrible. And then play, if play is just looking into the box of the screen, oh, that's a whole nother realm of shit.
Yeah.
You know, so reality, community should be about creative spaces that include large proportions of natural experiences and opportunities to create through imagination. That would be that'd be really fun.
The arts. I mean, I'm thinking now of Damanhur, and they're always putting on plays, and the musicians are performing, and they have clothing designers who put on, you know, just like you would see in Paris, they have, you know, dress up in the clothing that they design, and they play all the time there. And Falco used to make up all sorts of games for them. There's one game that has been going continuously since the inception of Damanhur, I believe. So it's been going for like 40 years. There's a room dedicated to the game. I think they call it the Game of Life, but it's basically a big risk game. And it was a place to get out whatever impulse you might have to dominate. and better, better do it in this game than on each other. But they would make up competitions, healthy competitions amongst the villages. So I think that's one reason why Damanhur was so successful, was they played all the time. I mean, they worked their butts off too, but they played all the time, the adults.
There's nothing incongruous about working and playing, because that's how life ought to be. And that's when you're most productive as well. Which touches into the point of the whole box structure that the virus of Western mindset has created. One of the artifacts of that is the notion of employment, which is about as fictional as the currency we're working with.
Right, there you go.
Employment is not, there's nothing that says we have to be employed in order to create wealth. We have been led down the rabbit hole as far as what wealth is, because no wealth has ever been created except by people getting together and doing things that they're inspired to do. That creates all the wealth.
Yep.
Whether it's being done in a collective that you want to call a company, creating the coolest new thing, or you're an individual or a small group just like brainstorming and riffing and doing whatever you can do, as long as it's supportive of the wheel, the larger collective, it is creating wealth that feeds back on you. And that wealth builds on itself constantly all the time. It's not this like artificial wealth that constantly pulls the rug out from underneath you and keeps devaluing, which is completely an artificial construct. The universe doesn't work like that. That's the false notion of the materialist science that the universe is just entropy. No, the universe is primarily syntropy, which is the only thing that could create life at all. And there's life everywhere in the universe, and there's lots of life in us. So, that syntropy is the process of being interactive and through cyclic feedback, learn, play, results. And so that's just essential. And we think in boxes rather than cycles. And so that's a whole nother thing. But the idea of wealth creation eliminates the need for like income from another source or the use of fiat currency that's artificial. All we need is a scaffolding or structure that allows us to share a basic technique that says, I declare that I'm going to do such and such and such. This is my inspiration and my dream and, what I want to do. And this has value. So you create a methodology and a structure for doing that in such a way that whatever you're doing, as long as it's for the benefit of others and not just yourself, can be then traded as currency, because it is currency then. That's what you're doing. And also it's not dead-ended. A script like that has to be able to be recycled when it's no longer of value. When you decide that you don't want to do what you're doing that's creating value, you're switching to another current, the script, goes away. Well, anyway, I've got lots of details on how that all can be done. I've worked on that for a while.
We're on.
I'm enjoying that so much of this conversation has centered around the ideas of play and games. I remember hearing a program on the radio where a fellow was talking about, if aliens would come and they would look at the earth, they would look at the history of the earth and people across all cultures. One thing that would be similar across all cultures without exception is play and is games. That's something that all of humanity for all time has shared. And yeah, we're as societies, we're going through these growing pains, and we're that's kind of bred out of us at a point. And another thought that's coming up is the conception that's raised, the conception of God, who is Krishna, the supreme personality of Godhead. And it's described that in Krishna's home, he doesn't work, he just plays all day. That this conception of God is not a God who's judging, who's constantly at work making rules, but this is an idea of God, that God is most himself when he's engaged in loving, playful exchanges with his friends and his family and his cows and all that. So ultimately, that's what we all want. We all want to be free. We all want to play joyfully. And it's just a matter of, figuring out how we can do that in such a way that also supports our lives.
I'm pretty sure that the goddess would weigh in on that the same way. The goddess want you to work all day.
Sure.
So if we're going to balance,
I wanted to ask
Krishna's playing a
question.
flute for Radharani. They're the ones who are having the most fun together. The goddess is right there playing with Krishna.
I wanted to ask a question about probably 5-6 years ago now, certainly before the Trump era, when we talk about how we get to that point. The concept of basic universal income was a really hot topic. And a lot of people at that point, or not a lot, several countries were trying to experiment with it. And the reason I became interested in Canada is because I'm from Canada, and I know they were running a project, a pilot project with a couple thousand people. And I just realized I have totally forgotten about that whole concept. There has been nothing mentioned about it in the last 5 or 6 years. Does anybody know what's happened with that concept, or because that's what's going to do it, or that's one way to do it, or to kick it off.
Right, so the idea of the basic income is that you then become totally dependent on the government. You don't bite the hand that feeds you. So there's a tremendous kickback, pushback on the idea that the government would provide an automatic income, especially since all the money is issued as debt. So all of the money in circulation is issued by banks for what will be profitable to the banks as debt, right? So the bank is actually lending you what they owe you and charging you interest. I mean, that's how absurd our monetary system is.
And how do we do it?
Well, basic universal income was actually first tried by the Romans a long time ago. Increase the dole. That's exactly what that was.
Right.
And basically the idea comes up whenever you get to the point where there's perceived to be a surplus of labor, and you can go into the whole thing about what makes you happy and who wants to do what, but there's as many desires and ways of looking at the world as there are us. It's just not that simple.
Oh, I know. But how do we start?
So the
Well,
thing
do
that,
you want to start with basic universal income because that there aren't jobs anymore, or just because it will facilitate this happy life where we can all just do what makes us happy and share our gifts with each other and all that? Is that where you want to go with the universal basic income?
Well, if that is the goal, then I guess yes, but I don't know.
The goal that the modern universal basic income, the goal of it is to prop up a faltering economy. Basically, they don't need the labor anymore, and that's the only reason they're even considering it.
Right.
Although right now they do need the labor, but the trend over time will return.
Mm-hmm.
so the issue is whether or not there's a dividend income, not whether or not there's a basic legislated income. The amount of money that's available for everybody so that they can live is a very objective amount, and it goes up and down based on the dividend that the economy is producing. So the way that the economy is organized is that everybody wants, at the end of their life, at the end of their working life, they want to have enough money invested so that their money can work for them. But the way everything is set up, that means that you're compelling somebody else to work for you. So as soon as we understand that it's the monetary system that's creating reality, and we reimagine what money is and how we could do it, then our universal sense of justice, our very common sense of justice, says that everybody needs to have what they need in order to be who they really are. And that is, so let's issue the money, not as debt to corporations or for mortgages or what have you. Let's issue the money directly, the right amount of money, not too much, not too little, the right amount of money, and let's expand and contract the money supply, but let's issue it so that everybody has what they need to live. So that everything that happens is a result of a voluntary initiative. And let's include not just the right to life, but let's also include the right to the capital that you need, the resources that you need in order to set things up so that you can be productive. That thing about, I have this great idea for what we should do and how we should organize agriculture in our community, and it's going to require this or that amount of money, and all we need to make sure of is that it's the right amount of money. So when we totally change our conception of what money is and what money's for, and recognize the ways in which the way money is issued now is manipulating us, is creating quote unquote reality, then we have the possibility of totally changing it. And that's why this conversation about the world that you know in your heart is so important, because it's what gets you out of all of the normal ideas about how society should be.
I had a conversation the other day with my daughter. She's 15 and she's a very, very hardworking student. Excuse my cat. But we were talking about careers and where she was going to go with her life. And I said to her, you know, what's important to you in terms of where you think you want to go? And she was talking about, you know, the pressure of study, and she wants to go to an Ivy League college and the whole thing. So I said to her, what are the components that, what drives you to be whatever it is you think you want to be in life? So she just said she's excited about study. She's excited about the possibility of getting into a career where new things are discovered, maybe in technology or whatnot. But I was trying to teach her three things about moving forward with her drive to be the best that she could be in life. And I said, you need three things. You need passion, talent, and mission. So we talked about passion, having a passion for what you do, what you're interested in, having the talent to do it exceedingly well. But the mission, and someone mentioned it earlier about your spiritual purpose in living, or what in Buddhism they call your dharmic purpose.
Yeah.
You know, I tried to teach her what I understood by that you're doing something, there's a service component to it, so that what you are doing or creating is at the service of humankind and our planetary existence, and the component of fulfillment. You feel fulfilled in what you do. So the mission one is something she couldn't get her head around. She was too consumed with just with the conveyor belt that she's on for examinations and points and scores and colleges. She could not think or outside the box to consider the idea of your dharmic purpose or your mission. And that's conditioning. That's conditioning. So I'm just really repeating what people have already said. That's part of our challenge, to get our kids out of that conditioning into the more creative impulse of dharmic purpose in living.
There's a very interesting corollary to that, and that is that the reason that we need the community is to know who we are and what our mission is, right? If you don't, if you have the culture that's presented on television, then you have no idea who you are or what you really should be doing. If you have a community of people who know who you are and are interested in you, then you discover very quickly who you are, what you're really good at, and what your community needs that you can do that they're going to appreciate. And boom, I need the community so I know who I am and so that I know what I want to do in order to, and the only thing that's satisfying is doing something that people recognize as valuable, that people will support you in doing. And guess what? I want to join you and I want to help you do that. But I only want to spend, 3 hours a week helping you to do that because I got all these other things I got to do too, right? And then I have my own project, which everybody else is helping me with. So our entire experience of life changes. David Graeber has written a new book, I can't remember the title of it, where he shows how this cycle, somebody was talking about the cycle, that there is so much evidence in the archaeology and the anthropology of the past where this equitable sharing kind of community existed. And it's all been wiped out of the history. Nobody wants us to know that there are millions of people in Mesoamerica who all lived in these when they were excavating them, they decided that they were palaces, but they keep going and going and going, and it's all palaces, all of them. Well, then it can't be palaces. It has to be where everybody's living. And it's beautiful, right? I mean, this is not beyond possibility. This is right in front of us. As soon as we start having those conversations about the world we know in our hearts is possible. That's my new mantra.
Tom, you wanted to share something, I think, right?
Yeah, well, imagination, of course, has been brought up by Eric and you earlier. And it made me think, especially as we're talking about history too, John just brought up the Nag Hammadi Library, of course, was discovered in Egypt in 1945. And the Gnostic Gospels are in there. And one of the Gnostic Gospels, it's not Thomas, I don't believe, which we tend to know the most about, but there's another one, it might be John, I'm not sure, that talks about the archons. And there is a quote that Jesus said, humanity is not your problem, the problem are the archons. So in the Gnostic Gospels, it talks about the archons as being a miscreation. And what they were missing was imagination.
Right.
And we, to escape from the control of those archons, our consciousness, must use our imagination. That's what we have that they do not have. And several of you have been referring to imagination either directly or indirectly. So I'm just reminded of that. And if we take it a little further, the archons are described in the Gnostic Gospels as being physically like a fetus. And some people have then thought that they're the grays. All right, I'm sorry I brought up PTs.
It's okay.
And I don't know that that's true, and that's just speculation, but it's possible. What they're good at is, what the archons are good at is copying reality. And the word for simulation in the Coptic language that the Gnostic Gospels are written in is capital H, capital A, capital L, HAL. And isn't that interesting? A coincidence. But if we, in fact, live in a simulation, the matrix, if we live in a simulation, and there's a lot of science that points to that, then the way we get out of it is to listen to the Gnostic Gospels and use our imagination. For example, imagine who we really are as spiritual beings, or you can imagine that you're not that, but whatever we imagine has the power to take us out of that simulation. So that's a reference that goes actually probably before the Bible was written, before the New Testament was written. So I've been drawn to that for a long time, and that helps me focus on the power of imagination. Einstein talked about the power of imagination too, of course. So I just want to throw that in.
So are you familiar with John Lamb Lash's book, Not in His Image?
Yeah, that's a book that really covers this, right?
Yeah, exactly. And this is really, really important because as soon as you're willing to entertain the idea that you're being influenced by an external power, external to you power that can get into your mind and can influence you, and then you don't have a traditional view of the devil, then the whole Gnostic way of understanding things is incredibly liberating. It's not like I'm up against something that I can't resist. It's a matter of recognizing what's going on, what they want, what the archons are wanting from us, and being able to accommodate that in a way that doesn't allow them to subvert my creativity. That you can see our culture as the technocratic, transhumanist, totalitarian tiptoe orchestrated by archons to turn us all into automatons because they're jealous, right? That's what's going on. You can just totally see it. Everything is oriented towards making us automatic. That's the archons. And as soon as you have the concept, that's the archons.
In the
So you can
archons
smile.
help God could create the world according to those legends? What were they jealous of us for?
Yeah.
Well, that according to the Gnostic Gospels, the archons created a false world. So whatever
they still were in charge, they created it.
Well, whatever.
So
Sophia wanted to go out and create something that somehow wasn't a full thing, and according to John, life, and so the creation is not a true creation. I don't know if you'd say it's a creation of God or not. I wouldn't say it is, but
I'm no expert on this. That's just how I remembered it. I've only read about it once.
Yep.
The Gnostics believe that a lesser deity basically created this place and that humans were worshiping a false god. And they're very dualistic texts. So Jesus was talking supposedly in the inner circle, he was explaining to people how to go beyond the veil, how to go behind the veil and understand the true nature of reality. But yeah, the archons were definitely bad guys in the Gnostic Gospels. They were the force that would tempt or fool, or they're almost jealous of humans.
right,
It's sort of the Lucifer story all over again, but it has some deeper significance, I think. I mean, I do appreciate the Gnostic texts. I find them fascinating. But they're very apocalyptic as well, most of them.
And there's so much that you can, once you become familiar with all the different creation stories and all the different ways in which in which people have understood how we got here, then you become very, very flexible in your thinking, and it becomes more and more and more possible in very concrete ways to reimagine how it should be. It's a very important thing. What John Lamlash describes is that Sophia inadvertently, not intentionally, inadvertently created the archons, and they in her effort to create the co-creator. I mean, the consistent element in all of the creation stories, although it's not always immediately obvious, but it's always there. The creator wanted a co-creator. And so the inadvertent creation of the archons is the opposite of the intentionality for the human being. right? So there's this opposition between our ability to create and to be the co-creator and to join gradually as we become worthy, so to speak. That's another thing that's in all of the creation stories, that the creator wants us to be worthy. The creator wants us to lift ourselves up to the place where we are worthy of co-creating. And so but once you're not wedded to
That's in
any one of
Genesis.
those stories, then you have this tremendous freedom to create the story that really works for us. And that we can only do together. I mean, I am so prejudiced in certain directions, and you're so prejudiced in certain directions, that it's only when we're working on the synthesis which is why Ken Wilber is so good, because there's so much synthesis there, and you get lost in it, if you know what I mean. But yeah, we sit together, we talk about how it should be, and come up with all the amazing things that we could do based on what each of us would be willing to put our shoulder to the wheel to accomplish. I'm done.
But it could be a pretty simple solution to our dilemma if we believe that our imagination is our key to our escape from the simulation. Maybe it's an AI simulation, whatever. There are people who channel ETs. I've been studying the ET stuff and met people and all for 30 years. And so I know, like George Andrews talks about an ET, Kyla, who is from a civilization called the Procyon. And the Procyons, that story is that the Procyons were invaded by the Greys, who were essentially AI, and overtook that civilization. And that's what they do throughout the Milky Way. And so this Kyla from the Procyon said, well, some of us escaped that. And the way we did it was to use our imagination as to who we really are, that we're spiritual beings having a physical experience. And that's how, and so what Kyla said, and this has been said by a couple other channelings of ETs, that you cannot fight them on their terms.
Right.
The weapon, the primary weapon that you have, if you want to call it a weapon, is your imagination. That is how you will free yourself from the control that you are under. You know, whether it's a physical ET control, if you look at it that way, or if it's a matrix that somehow has been put around the planet and around us, it all comes back to imagining who you truly are, whether that's visualizing. In fact, they say specifically, you have the ability to visualize, actually see in your mind who you are, like you're a whole sphere around the body. So we can use creativity. I don't think we're teaching the kids that in school, but anyway, they have the creative imagination already. So maybe they're already doing that. But I firmly believe
Are you,
for us.
I'm curious, Tom, are you using the term imagination or creativity in place of enlightenment, or do you see it different than the Buddhist concept of perfecting yourself, reaching karmic balance, and blissing out to the point where you can stay or leave?
I'm seeing imagination/visualization as a tool that we have that will help us remember who we truly are in this simulation. We're in a simulation. This is not our true reality, but we must remember who we are. We're spirit in oneness with God.
Okay, so you're not equating it with the term enlightenment.
Well, it could be enlightenment, but it's something we're doing ourselves through the abilities we have. I'm sure we're helped, but I guess you could call it enlightenment, but I don't consider it enlightenment from a non-enlightenment state. I consider it enlightenment remembrance from what we always been and always are.
And so do you see that as a solo activity? Basically, I'm responsible for awakening myself, you're responsible for awakening yourself? Or do you see it as, like the rage right now is collective awakening, mutual awakening. And one of our authors is leading this movement, and the notion being that it's relatively easy to be a monk on a mountaintop and reach enlightenment. And if that path is true, you know, you can leave. You can basically leave this dimension. But what you're describing seems a little different to me. Like, do you see this as a solo exercise in trying to escape this matrix?
Absolutely not. In
Okay.
fact, my mind probably cannot accept the imagination that I give it, that I am this sphere of light, unless I imagine it in someone else. Then my mind can accept it. So when I drive, I live in Charlottesville. When I drive, like today, I was driving up to Monticello. If I can keep my mind at it, and I'm pretty good at it now after 30 years, every car that I meet, I imagine them as a sphere, that person as a sphere of light or whatever around them. I try to do it in a large group. I even tried to do it on August 11th and 12th, 2017, when I was right there amongst all those people in Charlottesville. I didn't do too well that day, but today I did pretty well. So it's, no, it's not an individual thing. It's a collective thing. We're all one consciousness. So it's that consciousness that I'm trying to imagine. And I have to keep convincing myself that it is something to do that has meaning. Look,
So the culture has taken the community away from us. And once you're engaged in creating community and being a part of a community, that experience of needing the community in order to experience who you are and what it is that you want to do is the key to understanding why we need it and why they keep taking it away from us. I mean, everything that the culture, that the powers that be, the culture that they're creating, et cetera, is doing. Everything that they're doing is, I mean, they're even trying to dismantle the nuclear family. I mean, they totally destroyed the extended family. They've totally destroyed place. Nobody's, I mean, who's been in the same place for any significant amount of time anymore? And if you are, where's the opportunity to affect the conditions in which we're living together with other people? It doesn't exist. So we don't have enough of an idea of what the power of our imagination would be when we're sharing it with the other. And as soon as we're sharing it with the other and we're relying on the differences and not trying to have everybody think the same, when we're appreciating and celebrating the differences, then the imagination just takes off. And it's just astounding what happens.
So before we close, we've got a few people who didn't get to share tonight. Nancy, Karen, Serafina, would any of you ladies like to leave us with a bit of your wisdom?
Well, it's a lot here. No, I'm a really good listener, Laura. Yeah.
I know you are, but I also know you have a lot to share.
Well, I think as soon as we stop compartmentalizing the topic of spirituality and becoming the spirit that we are, means a lot. We're good at categorizing things and talking about different things in different ways, but we are spirit. Basically, spirit is in everything, and becoming spirit, I guess. I'm really rambling, but there's been so much talked about this evening. Very important topics and very enlightening subjects. So I'm glad to be here and to have heard it.
We're glad you're here.
Thank you.
Karen, would you like to share anything before we close?
Yeah, I just really good to be here and to hear all the sacred inquiry and discussion and to hold so many different, and the, yeah, there's a lot. I feel like I'm really up in my head, and I am wanting to connect down more into my body. But the play, the imagination, there was something about water, and the water is so polar too, and that fascinates me, like the polarity of water, which actually gives us life, and how we can be with that polarity and use it, because it's really like what runs life and gives us energy. I'm like popping like with all these different ideas. And thank you
Good.
for the space and the opportunity to share and be here. Yeah. And I am looking at visiting you guys someday.
Good. Well, let us know. Contact Katie. Let us know.
And then it disappears when I go off of it. I'll be there someday. Yeah.
You want to say anything, Serafina?
Yeah, I really enjoyed listening, and it opened my heart and my crown chakra. A lot of stuff activated. But the wheel that you constructed and the work that you've done on bringing the big picture macro down to the micro and how to connect all of them together is I think still very potent. And the aspect of active consent on a daily basis, and how we each cosmically collaborate to bring ourselves up to the highest vibration, so that we are always surrounded and protected by light and the energies that we choose through creating our field of heart cohesion, like having these conversations and then having it physically as well together can, I think, make the difference, so that macro can be overwhelming, but then bringing it to the micro and being grounded in it, especially being in nature, playing with kids and the intergenerational appreciation of being present in the moment of sacred beauty, and that living on that precipice of what is becomes the real thing. I think that is how we're going to change today and tomorrow and the next day. So thank you everybody for sharing. And yeah, I needed this imagination boost. So thank you so much.
It's definitely the key. So what we're going to do with during the rest of the year, we're actually going to do deeper dives into each of those sectors and talk about how each one contributes to a fulfilling spiritual life. So we're going to be we did a lot on education tonight, but actually that's the next sector. That's the one we're going to focus on next month. And the young man, Michael, with the little 3-year-old, he is going to facilitate that salon. And I think he's got somebody coming. I think he said he had a friend who does run an alternative school for children, who's also going to be facilitating. So we're going to do a deeper dive into education. Hope you'll join us next month. And we're going to close with the end of our mantra, which goes like this. Source of all being, we thank you for this life. We thank you for this night. And we pledge to be pure instruments of peace. May the entire universe be filled with truth, love, and light. Om Jai.
Someday.